Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Karen A, and I am here in Jerusalem, Israel. We have fellows from all over the Afro-Euro continents and probably from other continents around the world. This meeting is live here now, but it's also recorded. So while there may be just a few people on the Zoom, about 350 people download these shares every week. So our special guest and all those on the line know that you holding the space and sharing truly does make a difference. This is the Afro-Euro Reco12 podcast. Every week, we have another fellow who has recovered, mostly using the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and has found the solution through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous to find recovery one day at a time. Although if you use other literature or found relief in a different fellowship, we're happy to hear from you too. Every week we have addicts who suffer from all addictions, all afflictions. So on the Afro-Euro Reco12, and you can find our website at Reco12.com, you could hear from fellows on Gamblers Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. You might find Workaholics, Sexaholics, Al-Anons, S-Anons, Adult Children of Alcoholics, Codependents Anonymous, Emotions Anonymous. Oh, and the list goes on and on. So whatever is baffling you, where conventional methods or therapies haven't worked, but the spiritual path has, you've come home and you're a part of our family where others might look at you befuddled. We get you. And we know where you've been, and hopefully you'll get some experience, strength, and hope for wherever it is you are headed. We have a number of different recordings on the Reco12 website. You can find Justin Be There, Noodle It Out with Nikki M, yours truly, Karen A, in Jerusalem with the Afro-Euro, and a number of great recovery resources. About a year ago, I did the parenting podcast for moms in recovery. We had some dads on too. My buddy Chris D in the UK, Nadia from South Africa, Kirsty in London, and on and on. If you'd like to contribute a seventh tradition, that does help cover the technical costs of Zoom and putting this whole thing together that Justin does so humbly and in service. You could pay that seventh tradition by going to Reco12.com/support. Now that we've gotten all that intro out of the way, it is my privilege and my honor to invite Andrew E., who is a fellow in my sponsee group. I won't give more details on that because I don't know what's anonymous and what's not. But Andrew E. is my Zoom fellow in the UK. He's going to share with us today. I think we changed the subject from a new employer. He'll correct me. Andrew E., welcome, and thanks for joining us. You will have 30 minutes to share, followed by Q&A. We're pretty chill around here. I'm going to ask participants to either unmute when our time is up and ask you questions, or they can write questions in the chat and we'll refer to them so we could benefit from your recovery and your experience, strength, and hope. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm just going to start with a prayer. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. Hi, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Andrew. I'm a very grateful, recovered drug addict and alcoholic. I feel very blessed to be here today. I'm very grateful to be asked back to share on this platform. And I say that prayer at the beginning because it reminds me that I'm not here because of anything I did. I'm here purely by the grace of God. And it was the first prayer I ever said in earnest. It was the first prayer it was suggested I say when I came into recovery. When I didn't know how to pray, I didn't know what this power was that I was supposed to get connected to. But I knew I needed to do something different. And I was willing and ready at that point to follow any suggestion that anyone could give me. And I'm only sitting here today in this state of grace because I came to believe in a power greater than myself that I choose to call God. I came to believe that that power would help me. I took a certain attitude towards that power, and I made a decision to place my life unreservedly in the care and direction of that power, which I call God. And it says in the big book on page 58 that we share in a general way what it used to be like, what we did, and what we're like now. But it also says on page 29, it says each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. And that's what I'm going to try to do today. And I'm going to start with another reading from the big book. This beautiful big book whose directions, whose words I was taught very early on to digest and devour and follow to the letter. I was so privileged that I've been given this message in an undiluted way, purely from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And on page 53, it says, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? And I will give you some background of how I got here. I was born into a very stable, very loving family. My father and my sister had died when I was very young, but I had a fantastic upbringing. I had a mother who was a Christian, who surrounded me with unconditional love. I had an extended family that were there for me all the time. I had a beautiful home. I was a bright kid. I went to a good school. I was academically successful. My future was laid out before me. I would study, I would go to university, I would get a good job, I would get married, I would have kids, and I would have this beautiful life. But at some point in my early teens, I made a decision that that wasn't enough for me. I thought there was something else out there. I thought there was something more exciting. I longed for a bit of jeopardy in my life. This all seemed too safe for me, and I don't know where this yearning came from, this seeking for something different. And I originally found it in alcohol and drugs. So when I had the opportunity at 15 of sharing a bottle of vodka with a friend of mine in a forest, I made a decision to take that opportunity, and I drank to blackout. From that moment on, I started to seek that sensation that alcohol gave me because it did something for me that I couldn't do for myself. It allowed me to construct this character, this personality that I didn't have before, because I was a very well-behaved, very quiet kid, very good at my schoolwork, and I wanted to be something different. And alcohol enabled me to do that. And drugs followed pretty soon on after that, you know, with cannabis and amphetamines and LSD and pretty much anything I can lay my hands on. So I smashed my way through all these different drugs while I was still at school. And I drank every weekend, and I often drank to blackout. And, you know, the consequences started to come. Looking back in hindsight, the consequences were coming thick and fast, or, you know, pretty quickly, you know, with broken relationships, broken friendships, you know, the disturbance it was causing at home. And I can see now that I started drinking alcoholically in my early 20s when I first went to work. I can see now that I had lost the powers of choice and control over alcohol. By the time I was 25, I made the decision when somebody offered it to me to put a needle in my arm and inject heroin. And when I took that first shot of smack, I thought I'd found everything I would ever need in life. The words ease and comfort could have been invented for that sensation. And it talks in the book about the sensation being so elusive. That sensation was so elusive. I chased that sensation for the next 30 years, and my life quickly spiraled down the drain. I began to lose everything worthwhile in life and destroy myself and destroy everyone that loved me and anyone that was unfortunate enough to get close to me. And I went into my first treatment centre at the age of 29. By the time I went in there, I weighed about 7.5 stone. Most of the veins in my body had already collapsed. I was injecting in my neck. My teeth were falling out. And I knew something was wrong. You know, I knew that this was a problem that I had to do something about. So I went into a detox and a treatment centre and did a lot of group therapy and counselling and you know, positive thinking and reading inspirational books and all this sort of stuff. And I got really well in there. And I thought, I've got it this time. There's no way I'm going to go back to the way I was. And I left that place full of hope and confidence because I knew what I suffered from. I understood myself now better. I thought there's no way I can pick up again. And what happened was within a week of leaving that treatment centre, I saw somebody that I used to use drugs with. And without even thinking of it, my head twisted and I walked across the road and I said, "Hey, man, how you doing? Do you know where we can score?" And the next thing I know, I'm sitting on the floor of a squat with the needle in my arm thinking, how did I get here again? And this was a pattern I repeated over and over again. And throughout my adult life, I would be in and out of detoxes and day programs and rehabs. And you know, we talk about the alcoholic cycle, you know, these 7 stages of the alcoholic cycle that it talks about in the doctor's opinion. And so, you know, I would come out of one of these places, I would feel restless, irritable and discontented because I didn't know how to deal with life. I would seek that sense of ease and comfort that I get from alcohol and drugs. This would lead me to giving into the desire yet again to pick up a drink or a drug. The phenomenon of craving would kick in and I'd go off on a spree. And for me, I would never know when that spree was going to end. And a lot of these sprees lasted a lot of years. Eventually, I would emerge remorseful, make a firm resolution that I'm not going to do this again. This was repeated over and over. And every time, you know, I'd reach a brief moment of clarity where I'd say this, you know, surveying the general devastation in every area of my life, this has to stop. And I'd make a sincere attempt to do something about it. And I thought, I'm never going back. I've got it this time. I was always so confused as to why I could never say stopped for any length of time. The only time I stayed stopped is if I was locked up in a detox or a rehab. As soon as I came out again, I picked up again. And I could never work it out. And what brought me into recovery was, I suppose, about 2 years ago. I'd reached a point in my using. By then, I'd become a crack addict as well. And I'd reached a point in my using where I really knew this was never going to stop. My life had shrunk to me being in one room with my alcohol and my drugs. I rarely left that room. The only people I would see was my elderly stepdad who I lived with and who was having to care for me. You know, a 56-year-old man. He was an 80-year-old man and he was having to care for me. The man in the off license and a drug dealer. They were the only 3 people I would engage with. I hadn't worked in 20 years. I hadn't been in a relationship in 15 years. I had no friends left. I barely had a roof over my head. And I reached a point where I looked at the aggregate of my life and I thought, you know what? It's just not worth it. Let's just get this over with. And I made a decision then that the best thing I could do was take my own life. That was the only way out I could see. And so I attempted suicide. And please, if that that thought crosses anyone's mind, please reach out to somebody. Please do that. There are plenty of people that can help. But I made that decision and I attempted suicide, and I woke up in hospital, attached to drips and everything. And I discharged myself. I pulled the drips out. I walked out of that hospital, went straight into an off license or a liquor store if you're in America, and got on the phone to my crack dealer. Because I have a mind, I have a self-talking mind that tells me lies, that tells me stories, speaks with authority because it speaks in my own voice. And despite all my previous experience, it says to me, Andrew, do you know what? If you pick up a vodka bottle and a crack pipe this morning, you might just have a good day, even though I haven't had a good day in 20 years. So I left that hospital, I picked up my vodka, I went and picked up my crack, and I was sitting back in my room again. But something collapsed inside of me. And I think when you reach that point, you've got two choices. You either give in and you carry on till you die, or you take your own life. Or something inside you awakens and says, do you know what? There's got to be something different. There's got to be a different way. And something inside of me was just reaching out, saying, Andrew, you've got to do something different. You've got to try. So I reached out to a drug and alcohol services who's I've been a client of these people for decades under various service names. And I reached out and I had an appointment with a key worker. And I had lots of these appointments before in my life, and that it was suggested that I fill out drinks diaries, which was obviously of no use to me, because if I can remember how much I've drunk, I'm certainly not going to tell you. It was suggested that I try cutting down one day at a time, which, as you know, if you're a chronic addict and alcoholic, is impossible. I went to groups where we talked about triggers, and the only trigger I need is that I've woken up this morning. It doesn't matter if I'm having a great day or a bad day, I'm going to drink and use, whether the sun's shining, whether it's raining. It makes no difference. I understand that now. Talks about relapse prevention. It never prevented me from relapsing, but this time it was different. I had a key worker who said, Andrew, you need to go into a detox and a treatment center. And I said, but I've done all this before. I've been in many detoxes and several treatment centers. She said, well, this is the only option we can offer you. She also said something else. She said, Andrew, whatever you do not try to stop drinking. And this I thought was great news. I thought, at last, somebody understands me and what I need. But my relief at being told that was quickly removed when she completed the rest of the sentence. She said, because it's going to take 6 or 9 months to get you the funding to go into treatment. She said, the way you're drinking, the chances are you're going to die before you even get there. She said, but if you stop, there's an even bigger chance, because you will have what's called a grand mal seizure, which will affect both sides of your brain, and you will not come back from that. So it seemed that I was doomed to an alcoholic death from that point on, and I might not even get the chance to choose a spiritual way of life. But for some reason, God kept me alive during those 9 months, and I went into another detox. And I was sitting in that detox unit. I was supposed to do treatment at a rehab that was attached to that detox unit. I found out later it was very similar to the treatment centers I'd been in before. And while I was sitting there 2 days before I was due to go into rehab, my key worker phoned me up and said, Andrew, I've got bad news for you. She said, they haven't actually got a place for you there for another 3 months. And of course, at that point, I threw my toys against the wall and I said, it's not worth it. This is, there's no way I'm going to be able to stay sober for 3 months. And she said, don't worry. She said, you're going to Scarborough. You're going to be driven to Scarborough. And if anyone doesn't know, I live in London. Scarborough is on the northeast Yorkshire coast, which is a long way away. And I made all sorts of excuses as to why I couldn't go there. But eventually I had to give in because I had no other choice. I had nowhere else to go. And I was driven into this treatment centre, driven up to this treatment centre. I already had a resentment against this treatment centre because my mind's telling me that if I'm in this place so far away, it's going to be really difficult for me to leave and pick up when the inevitable happens and that thought comes into my mind that says, Andrew, you need to go and pick up a drink or a drug. It's a really good idea. And I was driven up to this place and I walked up the 20 steps that lead to the entrance of this treatment centre. I looked and felt like I'd been dug up. I didn't have the strength to carry my own bag. And walked into this place. And what I didn't realise then, that I was walking into somewhere that would change my life forever. Because this treatment centre was different. The difference was that this treatment centre did nothing but the big book and the 12 steps. And I was taken straight into a 2-hour big book study, and I was sitting there full of fear and full of self-pity, and the people are talking about these weird steps and God and stuff like that. And I thought, this is all nonsense. This is not what I need. But there was a part of me that sensed, deep down within me that there was a solution there, and I don't know where that came from. What I did know was that I might not know what these people, I might not want what these people were offering, but I did know that I didn't want what I had anymore, that I couldn't go on the way I was living. I came to believe in the hopelessness and futility of my life as I had been living it. And I tried everything else, every other possible avenue to get well. And I'd never been able to stay stopped. So I really had no choice but to give this stuff a go. I was introduced to my 12-step treatment, 12-step teacher in that treatment centre. And I said, look, I'm really lost and I'm really frightened and I don't know what this stuff is all about. And I don't want to stay here, but I don't want to go back to the way I was living, and I really don't know what to do. And he told me later that was the best possible position for me to be in, because my mind and my heart were so broken in that moment that I think I opened up to this bit of light, this bit of hope that I could see in other people. And I started to understand what I suffered from. And I knew that once I put a drink or a drug inside me that I couldn't stop. But I thought it was just a case of mental control. I thought eventually I would be able to think my way out of this problem. Because after all, I'm a quote unquote intelligent guy. I should be able to do this. When I found out that I am bodily different from other people, that once I put one inside me, I set off this phenomenon of craving. And how can I explain it? If I'm craving water because it's a hot day and I'm thirsty, and I get a jug of water and I drink that water, I reach the point where I'm satisfied, where my thirst is quenched. With alcohol and drugs, I never reach that point. I have this unquenchable thirst that develops, and the more I do it, the more my body needs it, the more my mind craves it. So I understood that. And once that was explained to me, it was kind of a relief, because it explained so many things for which I could not account for. Why it was that despite all previous experiences, as soon as I put one inside me, I was off to the races again and turning up in, accident and emergency departments and rehabs and detoxes and criminal justice courts and all that sort of stuff. But I also found out that my illness centers in my mind. That I have a mind that will tell me at any given point that it's a good idea to pick up a drink or a drug, that my mind cannot bring into my consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of last time. It doesn't tell me how bad it was. And even though in my gut I might sense that it's not really a good idea, that thought will quickly override any other thought. I don't choose when that thought comes into my head. I have no power over that thought. And it talks about being powerless over alcohol. What I'm really powerless over is that impulse that leads me to picking up a drink or a drug. And once I pick up, I have no power over the compulsion to continue until I've destroyed myself. So as a chronic drug addict and alcoholic, my only one problem, my real problem, is lack of power. Having understood that, it gives me the willingness to seek this power. And I came in with a really bad reaction to the word God and the suggestion that there is a divine answer to my problem. But the thing is, I was so desperate, so broken, and could see no way out. That with that desperation, I didn't argue about any of that stuff. I just did what was suggested. And I came to believe in this power because I could see something working in other people. I could see people in front of me that had been through all the same stuff that I'd been through, that suffered from the same thing that I'd suffered from. And yet they were shining. They had this light in their eyes, and they had something that I couldn't explain, but it was something that I wanted. It was something that was very attractive to me. So I came to believe that this stuff could work. So when it was suggested that I prayed and I meditated in that treatment center, I got down on my knees and asked for help. I didn't know how to pray, but I was willing to do it. I say, how do I do this? How do I connect to this power? What do I have to do? And I was given that third step prayer to say. And it was suggested that I say it 3 times every morning and 3 times every evening until I felt something. And do you know what? I started to feel something in that treatment center. I began to feel the flow of something that I'd never felt before. This spirit, what I now know is this power. Because I knew that I wasn't alone on this journey. I knew that there was something there that could help me. And as I went through the steps in the treatment center, that belief blossomed and grew, and what I thought was like the dying embers of my life turned out to be the start of a fire that started to grow inside me and continues to grow to this day. So when it came to turning my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God, a decision. On a very basic level, I think what I decided in that treatment center was that I'm going to go through with the rest of this program. I gave myself to this program, if you like, because I knew something was working for me. And I felt a real turning point around that decision. You know, I really began to be possessed of a willingness and a desire and a thirst for knowledge that I could not have manufactured myself. Having gone through the steps again since, and I've just started going through the steps for a third time because I have this thirst, this hunger to get deeper into this program. I realize now that decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God is the most important decision I will ever make of my life, to place my life unreservedly in the hands of a loving God that will lead me and guide me through every moment of my day. So what does it mean to have a new director and a new employer? I'm going to go back to the book again, if you just allow me. It says on page 62, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So all this time, as I look back, and I only learn in hindsight, I could see that all these decisions I'd made through my life had brought me to the point that I was at there when I walked into that treatment center. That every decision I've made was what brought on this destruction, this pain that I was going through. And I'd been trying to run my own life. I'd been trying to control everything around me. And I thought if only life went my way, then it would be different. That eventually, you know, I would be able to gain this element of control and it would be all right. And this imaginary point in the future never came. But I thought, if only you do something that way, then I'll feel all right. If only life goes a bit better, that will be all right. If only I have some money, that will be all right. And, you know, and I'm trying to control these things and trying to manipulate these things into the place. And the more I try, the more painful it gets when I fail. So that was my life run on self-will. When I did my first step 4 and 5, I saw what the results of my life run on self-will were. And it wasn't a pretty sight. So basically what happened was I was sacked as CEO of Andrew Incorporated because I'd run the company into the ground. They brought in somebody that was much better at running my company. And it says in Jim's story, it says, I felt irritated that I had to work as a salesman for a company I once owned. Well, now I have to work as an employee for a company I thought I owned, but I don't feel irritated by it. I feel a sense of relief and joy that I'm no longer having to run my own life. Because at no point in the 12 steps does it say, you have reached the point where your life is now manageable by you. So I have a new director today and a new employer. And what does that mean? It means I have a purpose in life today, and that is to seek God's will in everything that I do. So this step 3, this turning my will and my life over to the care of God, it's not a one-time done deal for me. I say that prayer every morning, and every morning I turn my will and my life over to the care of God, because I have a choice in the morning. I either turn to God or I turn to Andrew. If I turn to Andrew, I know things are not going to go very well. So I allow God to run my life for me today. And I ask for knowledge of God's will every morning and the power to carry that out. And how do I know it's God's will? Well, I know it's God's will if I feel that I'm sowing harmony rather than confusion. I know it's God's will if what I do is helping somebody else and not just myself. I know it's God's will if I'm doing what I need to do in that day and I'm not seeking what I want out of a situation. I know it's God's will if I'm not placing expectations on an outcome. I'm just doing what I need to do in that moment. And to have a new employer, what does that mean in my life today? It means I have a purpose in life, a direction in life, and a meaning in life that I've never had before. I feel today that I can actually contribute to life. And I get a great sense of satisfaction out of that. And it's a byproduct of what I do, because this is a selfless program. And at the end of Fred's story, it says, I've found a life that's infinitely more satisfying and useful. And those two words are so interlinked for me, because that is my purpose today, so to be useful, to be of maximum service to God and those around me. And that doesn't mean just the people in the rooms, in the fellowship. That means anyone around me in every given situation. How can I be helpful? How can I contribute? What can I do for this person today? And the byproduct of that is I gain happiness out of that. I gain satisfaction out of that. That is my reward, but it's not a reward I'm seeking. It's something that comes to me. What does it mean to be an employer of God today? It means I have a purpose today, and that is to help God's kids. So this is why I come on meetings like this and I share this message. I take other people through the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is by far the most important part of my program. I heard it once described that what we do in these rooms is we take the hand of the still suffering addict or alcoholic and place it in the hand of a God of his or her own understanding. What a privilege it is to do that job. I feel so blessed to be given this assignment by God and to know who I am today and what I'm here for. I'm a child of God, like the billions of other people on this planet. I'm a child of God, and I'm here to have a relationship with God, and I'm here to help God's kids. So I have a new job today, and I have a new director, and I have a new employer. And I'm just going to finish by reading the step 3 promises, which I found to come true in every area of my life. It says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. So what have I turned over to God by making that decision? I've turned over all my fear, all my anxiety, all my control, all my resentment, all my anger, all those things that were tangling me up for so long. Because now the natural order of things has been restored. God is the principal. I am his agent. He is in the primary position. I am in the secondary position. And my prayers are very simple today. The big book tells me very clearly what I should pray for. And I pray only for knowledge of God's will for me today and the power to carry that out, and that my problems be solved only as they may bear on my ability to be useful to others. That is my job today. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Reco12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Great. Wow. I was talking. I was on mute. That might be the most powerful share I've heard in a really, really, really long time. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your humility, and open and sharing your path. Really, really inspiring, and really gave hope to me and gives hope to others where they think they might be hopeless. And I kind of love the fact that you came from a really good, warm family, because a lot of people tend to attribute their addiction, to dysfunction, to, this abuse, that abuse, divorce, death, whatever. And, I think that helps underscore what Dr. Silkworth says, that this is, an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind. And it doesn't matter if you're upper class, lower class, middle class, had a good mommy, had a bad mommy, had an abusive mommy. Yes, daddy, no daddy. I love that you bring that here. So I'm going to start with the most important part first. You mentioned that working with others, taking others through the 12 steps is the most important part of your program. Take us deep into that. Whoever's on the line needs a sponsor. Put your number in the chat. Whoever is sponsoring, please listen to what Andrew has to share with us. I want to hear about how you sponsor, how many you sponsor, your experience in sponsoring, miracles in sponsorship, all things step 12. Take it away.
Well, I started sponsoring people quite early on in my recovery. As I say, I went to a treatment center where I did all 12 steps in 3 months in that treatment center, and I hadn't been out very long. And the guy who took me through the steps in treatment, who is now a close friend, and we do a lot of work together, phoned me up and he said, "Are you ready to sponsor yet, Andrew?" And I'd only been out a few weeks, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know." And before I got a sentence out, he said, "Yes, of course you are," and sent me a number. Nothing came of that approach, but a couple of weeks after that, it put the idea in my head. So I started to make myself available to sponsor on Zoom meetings. And somebody reached out to me and asked me to sponsor them. And I said yes. And then I called my own sponsor and I said, "What do I do?" I said, "I could really mess this guy's life up. I could kill this guy." And he said, "You can't, Andrew." He said, "His life's already messed up." He said, "The worst that you'll do is get in the way of his using for a while." So I started taking people through the work. I started with this one guy, and then somebody else asked me. And the more I did it, the more I grew in confidence. But the thing is, I learned from a lot of people. I've had a lot of really good teachers on my journey. I mean, I'm 16 months clean and sober, and I've been blessed by the people around me. I did a lot of big book study in treatment and since I came out of treatment. So I was always in this book, always gaining something more. And, within 6 months of starting sponsoring, I was confident in my ability to take somebody through this work. And the more I did it, the more rewarding it was. What I learned very quickly, though, is that I'm in the action business and not in the results business. So all I'm doing is I'm there as a guide. Whether they stay clean or sober is not my business. It's between them and God. Only God can do that. I can't do that. So whether there's success or failure, I don't blame myself, or I take no credit for it. And especially recently, having started taking the steps again myself, I'm getting a deeper understanding of what the authors of this book are actually telling us. And this is something that I can then take on to the people that I sponsor. Because that's what it's all about for me. It says in step 10 that our purpose is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So what that means is I have to learn things and then I have to put them into practice. And this increases my effectiveness in helping others. I don't always believe in the sort of thing that we have nowadays where, you put your hand up and wait to be asked. It tells me in the book that we make the approach. So when there are newcomers about, I take numbers off Zoom meetings. I do a lot of in-person meetings and I make the approach. And I say, if you want me to help you, I can. And it's such a privilege when somebody asks you and somebody said, yes, I'd really like you to help me and take you through this work. But the thing is, not everyone's going to get it. People will come to you saying like they're desperate for help. And when you start suggesting that they do stuff, they'll come up with all sorts of excuses as why they can't. And that just means that they're not ready. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. There's no judgment in that. And especially lately, I've been working with a couple of people, a couple of ladies actually, that have been through the steps before and relapsed, and I'm taking them through the steps again. And it really is just such a joy, to see people's face light up when they see the recognition of themselves in these words. I was working with a lady the other day and she said, my God, it's amazing that somebody's actually written a book about me. Because that's how I felt when I was first taken through this book. How did somebody in the 1930s know all about me? So, yeah, it's an absolute privilege and an honor to do this work. And it is the most important part of my program. I do a lot of service. I get asked to speak a lot, but all that sort of is secondary to passing this message on, because that's what it tells me in step 12. Having been given the gift of this spiritual awakening, I'm given the job of then carrying this message to the next addict or alcoholic. I hope that answers your question.
Amazing. How do you find the strength to work with others when you're having
Sorry, Karen, I couldn't quite hear you.
Or you're feeling off, or you're having difficulties? Can you talk about that?
Do you know what, Karen? When I'm feeling off, if I'm having a bit of a flat day, pretty much without exception, if I get on a call and start taking somebody through this book, I call it, and the lady that's taking me through the steps at the moment just calls it turning pages. So if I'm feeling flat, I get on a call and I start turning pages with someone, I immediately feel lifted up, because it takes me out of self, because I can get in my own head, I have this self-talking mind, and it's usually quite negative if I listen to it, if I attach to those thoughts. But as soon as I get into this book with somebody, I'm lifted up, because this book brings it alive to me. And the way I sponsor is I'm a line-by-line sponsor. I don't just read the book. I go quite deep into explanations of what everything means. And every time I do that, I'm learning something more myself. And by doing it with somebody else, it simply takes me out of myself. Working one-on-one with somebody, you really feel the presence of God there, that God's working in and through me. So it is actually, the best antidote to feeling low that I could ever have.
Hey Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss Reco12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to Reco12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform.
looks like Karen dropped off. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask Andrew or post it in the chat? Thank you, Andrew, for your fiery, pure here.
Yeah.
How you went from like insanity hell to like a beautiful life of giving and doing God's will. Does anyone have a question they want to ask Andrew now? Andrew, can you share a little bit more about your steps 10 and 11, please, and also about how your relationships changed?
Yeah, steps 10 and 11. Steps 10 and 11 are something that sort of evolve, especially step 11 evolves all the time for me. But step 10 is, you know, you quite often hear people say that they sort of overlook step 10. And when people sort of go back out there and come back, the first thing I ask them is, what did your step 10 and 11 practice look like? Step 10, I love step 10 because in a book of clear-cut directions, I think the directions for step 10 are very simple and very clear-cut. It tells me what to
I'm just on the meeting over a few minutes.
It tells me exactly what to look out for. It tells me what to do when these things arrive. So when I'm disturbed by something as I go through my day, by resentment, dishonesty, fear, selfishness, the first thing I do is I stop and I pause, you know, that pause from step 11. You know, so I stop, I pause, and I ask God for help. Always turn to God, always ask God, show me what I need to do next. Throughout my day, I'm always doing that. So I stop and I turn to God. I say, God, please help me with this. Please remove this from me. The next thing I do is I get on the phone, and I have several people, several trusted fellow travelers that I call my step 10 buddies, and we share inventory together. So I get on the phone to somebody because I lack perspective on my own. I need somebody else to bring perspective in, and I discuss this with somebody. So it's watch, ask, discuss. So I discuss it with somebody else. Make an amends if I've done something wrong, if I've shot my mouth off when I needn't have done that, when I've been rude to somebody, if I've done something that harms somebody else, which is not very often, I'm grateful to say. It's usually something going on in my head rather than something I've done. But if I need to, I make an amends and I apologize. And most importantly, then I resolutely turn myself to my thoughts to someone I could help, because whenever I do that, it's the same as taking somebody through the work. Whenever I'm thinking of what I can do for somebody else, I'm out of my own head. You know, being selfish and self-centered to the core, that is the core of my problem. The answer to that is to be selfless, to get out of my head and think of what I can do for somebody else. And that might mean making a phone call. It might mean doing something for my stepdad at home, or it might simply mean praying for somebody who's struggling at the moment. And I don't always write step 10s down. The book actually doesn't say write step 10 down, but I sometimes find it useful. So, you know, I can knock out an inventory on my phone. If it's really serious, I might sit down at home and write out 4 columns and see where I'm going with this. I also use an app called Rapid Step 10. Not an app, it's like a form that you fill out that I find really useful, because you identify your character defects. It immediately gives you the character assets that you can practice to balance that out, you know, the opposite side of that. It gives you a little bit to fill out whether you owe an amends. Then you fill out who you can help. So you actually put the names of the people that you're going to help. And then I share it with my sponsor and with a couple of other guys usually. So, yeah, that's how I kind of do my step 10. Step 11 is developing all the time. You know, I've got my nightly review, my step 11 nightly review, which is like the sort of safety net that catches the stuff that I missed with step 10 during the day, or stuff that's still hanging on there. And the important thing with my nightly review is to look at the positives as well as the negatives. And if it's the negatives, I don't get caught up in sort of like morbid self-reflection and say, oh, I've got this wrong, and, you know, what am I going to do? All that stuff. It's just merely to look at it from an objective point of view. And if I've got a lot of positives on there, if I say, look, I've helped all these people today, that I then say a prayer and I thank God for working in and through me today, because my ego would very much like to give me a pat on the back and say, well done, Andrew. So I have to remember that this is God's work, not mine. And my prayer and meditation practice is changing all the time. Found it quite hard to meditate on my own when I came out of treatment. So, I used guided meditations. I don't do that now. My prayers in the morning are quite simple. My prayers always begin with gratitude to God. I thank God for this moment, for this opportunity to experience life. I thank God for God and everything that he does for me in my life today. I then ask for God's direction. I ask God to show me the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, how I can be of maximum service to God and those around me, how I can grow in understanding and effectiveness. I always say the step 3 prayer and the step 7 prayer, and I end always by saying, your will, not mine, be done. And I tend to do a 20-minute meditation in the morning, a silent meditation based on something called centering prayer, which is when I focus on my breathing and a sacred word, which is usually like love or just God or something like that. Because I used to think that meditation was, thinking nothing all the time. And this is impossible. Thoughts are going to come and go, but my thoughts are just like clouds passing across the sky. I don't have to attach to them if I return to my breathing and this word. And then I do quite a lot of reading as part of my morning routine. I have some daily reading books, like spiritual books. There's a book called Jesus Calling, which is a book of daily spiritual readings, and another one, which is like a recovery daily reading book called In God's Care. And sometimes I'll read on those and I'll meditate a bit on the reading as well. So that's what my morning routine looks like at the moment. But it's always open to development, because it says in step 11, to improve our conscious contact with God. So I'm always looking to develop this relationship that I now have that is very new to me, but is by far the most relationship I will ever have in my life. So I'm always looking to gain a deeper understanding of my relationship with God. I hope that answers your question.
Hey, it's Karen. I'm back. That is just so unbelievable. I relate to, 10th step being something evolving, 11th step being something evolving, different meditations, different apps, different things in different periods of life. And of course, working with others, this program is so counterintuitive, whereas therapy or whatever would have you sitting in a chair talking about your problems. This program says if you're feeling blue, this other day, I was kind of having a resentment, and I wrote it out and I meditated and I did everything right. And then I remembered when all else fails, and someone asked me to start a women's meeting, and I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for that direction. We listen for that direction from higher power. We go slower. We have a new employer, a new boss. Maybe if we're already talking about 10 and 11 throughout the day, can you give us an example, like a concrete example of a resentment that came up or a character defect that came up recently and how you handled it, if that's not too personal?
Hey, Reco12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word-of-mouth support, keeps Reco12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at reco12.com/support, or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Reco12 Spearhead.
No, that's fine. There was one this week, and this guy, and I get this sometimes in the rooms, and I was told I would get this in the rooms. There are people in the rooms, and this is not a judgment, but I'm pretty full on with my program. And there was this guy who's been around a while, and was just having a phone conversation, and he started making all these suggestions. I suggest that you cut down to a certain amount of meetings a week, and he's not my sponsor. And it was sort of unasked for advice, and I suggest you do this, and I suggest you don't share so often, and blah 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 blah. And to me, because I'm self-centered, I think it's all about me. I took it really personally. I took it as a criticism, and what I didn't do was a step 10 on it when I should have done, because I just brushed it off. And actually, what I found was it had been festering for a while. So the next time I knew I was going to see him at a meeting yesterday, I was on my way there, and I started to think of all the clever things I was going to say to prove I was right and to gain the upper hand. And thankfully, what I did on the way there, I prayed and I asked God for help with this. I made a quick phone call to somebody. By the time I'd done that and got to the meeting, you know, I'd let go of it, because I get on pretty well with him most of the time. And our relationship, it didn't affect, I didn't say anything, you know. That's what happens if I don't do a step 10. And that's, you know, and it's usually something where it's a perceived slight against me or something like that. The other step 10s
So
I do regularly. Sorry?
Go ahead.
The other step 10s I do regularly against things that are outside of my control. Like if I'm trying to get somewhere and public transport's broken down or something like that, and I get so sort of like annoyed and everything, and I think, why am I getting like that? Because this is not in my control, you know, and it's not just me it's affecting. So it usually comes from this self-centeredness, this self-centered fear of not getting somewhere on time, self-centered fear of what other people think of me, all that sort of stuff. But I know what happens if I don't get on top of it quickly, because it does sit with me. Even though I'm denying it, it will come to the surface eventually.
Now, you said usually you need to do a step 10 for perceived slight. I'm going to challenge you, and I hope you really don't have this, people in your life, but I sure do. What about a real slight? What about somebody, you know, just this week I had someone tell me, you're not okay. Why didn't you remind me of this person's, you know, memorial? You don't care about me. You only care about yourself. You don't care. Let's say you have a real live abuser in town, right? You know, then what?
Well, that's a difficult one. I did have this situation a little while ago when I sort of stepped in as GSR of a meeting, and we'd taken this meeting, and this lady wanted to put herself forward as GSR. So we asked her to go out of the room while we discussed it. And we were discussing it for a long time. So she obviously cottoned on to the fact that you know, we had a lot of reservations about her taking this point. So when we asked her back in, she just let rip at everybody. I know you've been talking about me, blah, 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 blah. But she particularly focused on me. She said, I don't know what you're doing up there. She said, I don't like your recovery. I don't know how you can introduce yourself as recovered. You haven't been around long enough, and just made a real personal attack on me. And I was really taken aback.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. I'm just going to stop in here because I hope you're all on translating this to your own life. Like I'm a religiously observant in my own religion here in Jerusalem. And somebody said to me a similar thing. So I'm really like, right, we want to identify in with our amazing fellow here, with Andrew. Somebody just said to me, you're not really religious, you know, just like you said to Andrew, you're not really recovered. So everybody, you know, make sure you're doing that cut and paste. You know, Andrew's not here because he's doing a Broadway performance or whatever they have in London, Carnegie Hall. I guess that's also New York. But you know, this isn't the theater, right? This is he's not here to dazzle you with his you know, recovery story. He's here to share, to help you identify. So somebody just said to me, you're not really religious. You don't really honor your parents. You don't really do good deeds. You know, you're just a fake news, you know? So everybody make sure to, if you have any people putting you down in your life, let's use this like I am here. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I was like really shocked. And I think everybody else in the room was. And my instinct is to bite back and defend myself. But I didn't do that, because what I realized quite quickly was that she felt hurt and rejected in that moment. So she was in pain. She was taking it out on someone else, like hurt people, you know? And I was able to pause then, and I was able to approach her afterwards and try and be helpful and say, are you okay? And try to give her a hug. She rejected it wholeheartedly and just walked off. But there's nothing I can do about that, you know. All I've done is keep my side clean, you know. I'm not saying I can always do
Wow,
that.
you're such a gentleman.
I'm not saying I can always do that. Sometimes the
Yeah, and
most
it's different when it's your mommy or your daddy, right? When it's some crazy
I was going
fellow,
to say
like the
sometimes
addicts
the
are
most
crazy people.
sometimes the most difficult ones are at home, because I live with my 82-year-old stepdad whose life I destroyed for decades, and who I left on his own when I went to go into treatment, whose trust I'd broken. And it's been a slow process of mending that relationship. And it's really pretty good now. I tried to make a direct amends and sit him down and make a direct amends, and he didn't want to listen to me, which was quite hard, because he just didn't want me to drag all this stuff up. But what he can see is what this stuff that I'm doing has done for me, does for the people around me. He sees that the fact that I help other people, that my attitude to life is so much different. But he's an 82-year-old guy. He gets really grumpy at times. I'm the only person here to take it out on. And, and sometimes, he'll have a go at me about different things, particularly, he can't get over the fact that there's no one in the fellowship that's actually controlling everything. He still thinks I've got a boss that's sending me out to do all these things. And, and sometimes I feel the need to defend that. And I lost my temper with him when he said that the other week, because I was going to do a share quite a long way away and a lot of travel involved. And it meant I was going to be back late at night. And he said, oh, of course you'll say yes, because you have to say yes to your bosses. And I really bit, and I really lost my temper. I said, I've told you before, there's no one telling me to do this stuff. And that was, and then I had to do a step 10 on that, and speak to somebody about it and make an apology and make an amends, because I have to understand the position that he's in. But it's at home that I think it's most difficult sometimes. And, when and he's getting on a bit, and really silly things, like he might sort of say for the fourth time, like, what day is it today? Where are you going today? Even though I've explained it 3 times. So when I'm in the bathroom, like getting ready in the morning, and my own halo is like dazzling me, he can quickly bring me back down to earth by saying, what day is it? Where are you going today? Do you know what I mean? God has a way of reminding me of my character defects, my impatience and my intolerance, and especially my judgmentalism. God will allow me to sit in a meeting sometimes and get into my own head, and I'm thinking, no, you're talking rubbish and you're not doing your program right, because I'm very good at that. And then suddenly, I think, Andrew, where on earth is this coming from? Who do you think you are? But God lets me sit with that until it gets a bit painful.
Wow. Okay, guys, words of the wisdom here, working this in home, this too is this man is a spiritually sick man. I would say a sick man or stepdad, whether it's mom, whether it's father, fellow, right? This person, like myself, is spiritually sick. Grant me the same patience, pity, and tolerance I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So with that, and leaving off on, God showing us our character defects, maybe we'll just take a second to pray that God remove all our character defects today and show us the next right action. And you can put your number in the chat if you want. Andrew, go ahead and put your number in the chat. I'm sure people will want to be in touch with you. I certainly will more frequently. This has been a blessing. You are a blessing. Thank you. And that'll have you. Did you hear me?
No, you went off a bit there.
Oi. Okay. Deal. I said you were a blessing. This was a blessing. Thank you. Please put your number in the chat. I will reach out to you. I'm sure others will want to reach out to you. And would you be so kind as to pray us out today, Andrew? Thank you so much for this. This was amazing.
Thank you. If you just bear with me. I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray with a prayer that I wrote myself. Heavenly Father, My life is now yours. My destiny is in your ever-loving hands. May my will and your will be as one, and may my desire to do your will never falter. As my awakening unfolds, I pray most humbly for the inner wisdom and strength to continue on the road of spiritual progress. And may others see through me that you are the light, the way, and the life. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you all. If you have questions for Andrew, you can go ahead and stay on. Take care. Bye-bye.